Hey guys, I'm Brittany from Quarter Acre Roots, where we talk about growing a lot on a little bit of space. And today we are talking about maximizing our space by interplanting flowers with our vegetable crops. Some refer to this as companion planting. I honestly just refer to this as maximizing your space and getting as much in a small space as possible. So we're going to walk through why I do this. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the benefits, and we are going to dispel some common myths around companion planting and what you can and can't do in the garden. Now keep in mind that many of these flowers are actually edible. Some attract pollinators and beneficial insects, some do a little bit of both, and all of them help to fill out empty spaces in the garden and shade out that soil to help conserve moisture and support biodiversity in your garden, because no one likes a monoculture. Diversity is good, my friends, in the garden and in life. So first, let's talk a little bit about why I like to mix flowers into my raised vegetable beds. So tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, squash, all of those, they're like some of the hungriest plants out there. You might think that it's a good idea to plant all of your vegetables together and to plant all of your flowers together and to devote little areas of your yard to specific things. And while that can be true in some ways, like I like to group my tomatoes together so that when I'm pruning them, I can just do all of them at once and I don't forget about one. And I like to group my peppers together because they have really similar, sometimes a little bit finicky lighting needs. And I like to keep my eggplants together because I want to try and monitor them for flea beetles and potentially even cover them to keep the flea beetles away. But a key part of growing these vegetables is making sure that the flowers are pollinated. And there's some birds going crazy over here, so hopefully they let me continue filming. They are losing their minds over here. That's part of having a garden that you attract living beings to, right? Is dealing with birds playing and losing their minds and fighting. My neighbor just started mowing their back lawn, and I just saw a giant rabbit run behind me and a groundhog peek its head out from under the shed. So it's just chaos back here today, but this is the time that I have to film, so we're gonna keep pushing forward. Pollination is a key part of growing a lot of these foods. So what we wanna be doing is attracting those pollinators to our garden for maximum fruit production. In addition to pollination, I really like to add in flowers all around my garden, whether they're native plants, perennial plants, or annual plants, because they are going to help fill up space. The biggest enemy of weeds is ground cover. If you're covering your ground, it's going to deter weeds. Now, a lot of perennial weeds are just going to be vicious. They're going to be hard to keep on top of, and covering the ground is not going to be all you need to do to deter them. But it is going to help deter things in your garden and decrease the amount of weeding you have to do. And when they cover that ground, they are also going to help shade out the soil and conserve moisture around your plants. Now, I don't want to get too much into companion planting today. I want to do a whole video just about companion planting myths and science-backed truths, because there's a lot of misinformation flying around online about companion planting. And that's not to deter you from doing things like planting basil alongside tomatoes, because there are some benefits, like strong smelling herbs like basil can help to deter some pests from your area. It's one of the reasons why I have a lot of strong smelling perennial herbs lining my house up by a lot of my raised beds. But it's not a silver bullet, and there's just so much more to interplanting your flowers with your vegetable crops than just like one specific relationship between two plants and it being a silver bullet to pest prevention. That said, planting flowers in your raised vegetable beds and around your fruit trees and whatnot can help with pest prevention. Not because necessarily they're deterring pests, but because they are inviting in the pests that we want to have in the garden. Excuse me, not the pests, the beneficial insects we want to have in the garden. So, for example, if you're attracting lots of pollinators to your garden just by growing a lot of things that are blooming and that are good sources of nectar and whatnot, you're also probably going to be attracting things like ladybugs and lacewings. Those are two of my absolute favorites for controlling aphids naturally in the garden without using any sorts of sprays, pesticides, whatever. I am constantly seeing lacewing eggs all around my garden, which is exactly what I want. I want bugs like that to move in and be happy here. So it's not, again, about having a bug-free garden or even getting rid of all the pests in your garden. It's creating a nice ecosystem that's working within itself to balance things out. And the last reason why I like to plant flowers around my vegetables and fruit trees is not just because they're pretty and they attract pollinators and they can cover the soil, but it's also because they can be edible, or you can use them to make teas, or you can dry them and use them for other things. So we're going to talk a little bit about why I chose some of these specific flowers that I chose for interplanting if the main reason isn't for pollinators. First, let's walk through our edible flowers. If you only want to invest in one annual flower to add into your garden this year, I would make it nasturtium. I have different types of nasturtium all around my garden. Some of the nasturtiums can stay quite small and some can trail really really beautifully. A lot of times you'll find these come in hanging baskets because they can get very long. This is a good example of one that I've actually cut back a couple times already. I have this one planted between some curly parsley over here, a little baby tomato plant over there that I'm gonna have climbing up this T-post, and then some cucumbers that you can see peeking out from underneath of the nasturtium. I also love throwing nasturtium in underneath of other plants. So I prune a lot of my pole tomatoes up bamboo poles, and you can see down here I have 2 nasturtium plants planted in this bed with somewhat of a trailing habit. This one is a cherry nasturtium, so I was hoping it would be a little bit more red of a color there. It looks like a little bit more of a pink, but honestly, I'll live. They're still really pretty, and they're doing an excellent job, as you can see down here, of shading that soil to help prevent moisture loss for my tomatoes. So that trailing habit is essentially going to be turning your nasturtiums into a living mulch in your beds. When I get into permaculture stuff, I start talking a lot about living mulches, and one of the things I use a lot as a living mulch in my yard is strawberries because they spread through runners and they shade out that soil really nicely. Nasturtium is a really great annual choice for your beds because you don't necessarily want your strawberries to outcompete your annual vegetables. You want to use an annual flower like nasturtiums. They're going to be awesome just slotted in anywhere in your garden. And in addition to the pollinators loving them, the flowers and leaves on nasturtium are edible as well. I grew them for a couple years before I even knew this, so don't feel bad if you didn't know it either. They have kind of a peppery taste and they can make a really nice garnish in salads over the summer. Okay, next up, let's talk about calendula. There are lots of different varieties of calendula that you can grow. You can easily find these seeds in stores wherever you buy seeds. These also bloom pretty early and bloom pretty late, so they have a long blooming season. I remember last year I was at our Master Gardener demo garden taking some like last pictures of the year to show everyone, like putting the garden to bed. This is how we do it. This is how things are looking now. And one of the only things that was still blooming was calendula. We were kind of shocked that it was still blooming. We knew that it was going to be a really good performer in cooler weather and that it was going to stay blooming for longer. But this specific type of calendula, I think these might be oopsie daisy calendulas. It was still blooming, still going strong, even though everything around it was looking really sad and dying off. And generally when you grow calendula, you're going to find it in a variety of different colors, but they're going to vary from like yellowish, orangish to brightish orange. I have a couple different kinds all around my yard. I have some that are from strictly medicinal seeds, which I believe is this kind, but then I have some that are like other different varieties. So I love how they provide a really bright, beautiful color for a long period of the season that the pollinators just love. And of course, the flowers make really great garnishes on salads as well, just like those nasturtiums. You can get yourself a really colorful salad by throwing in some of these hot orange calendulas with some of those red nasturtiums. It'll be really beautiful. Calendula is also really great for making teas. So I cleared out this little patch in my front yard where I removed the mulch and threw down a bunch of compost and just sprinkled seeds. So now I've got this nifty little calendula patch growing here that I'll just be able to come out and pluck the flower heads from, and of course let it reseed for next year. Okay, third up, we're going to talk about chamomile. This is another one that's really great for making teas if you're into that sort of thing. There are these delicate little daisy-like flowers that you can just pick off and dry and turn into teas. If you've ever gotten like a sleepy time type tea, chances are that that sleepy time bear on the box has had some chamomile in his tea. These tiny flowers are also really great for beneficial insect support because if you've ever grown chamomile, you probably know that the plant will pretty quickly get covered in aphids. Aphids love chamomile. What those aphids will then do is send off signals to bring a bunch of ladybugs into your yard. It's kind of wild how it all works. It's almost like nature knows what it's doing a lot of the time, right? So if you start to see aphids on your chamomile, don't freak out. The plant's probably going to be fine. What I do if I harvest flowers and there's aphids on the stems of the chamomile, because that's usually where they are, is I will just submerge them into a bowl with some dish soap, let the aphids fall off, and then rinse off the flowers after that before I dry them. I also grow 2 types of chamomile. This one right here is actually a Roman chamomile, and that's perennial where we are here in Maryland Zone 7A. German chamomile is going to be the kind that dies off every winter and that you have to start fresh from seed every year. Since this one is perennial, all I really have to do at the end of the year is cut it back to the ground just as it is dying off for the year, and it will come back with a vengeance. Now, this is actually a really good comparison right here because this right here is Roman chamomile, and right next to it is one of my German chamomile plants. So you can see that the Roman chamomile tends to grow in a little bit more of a sprawling living mulch type habit, whereas the German chamomile tends to grow taller and straight up. So since this one is annual and it started off as a tiny baby seed that I planted myself, it's just really starting to take off. The foliage is also a little bit different on these plants, even though the flowers look very, very similar. The foliage I find is just a little bit more feathery on the Roman perennial chamomile when compared to the German chamomile. The German chamomile almost looks like dill to me. I have made tea out of both of these German and Roman chamomile flowers. I have not noticed a difference whatsoever. So if there is a difference as far as like herbal uses and making teas goes, let me know in the comments if you know. I'm interested to learn, and that's definitely one of those things that I'm going to think to myself, I should go research that, and then I'm going to leave and I'm going to totally forget about it. And maybe deep dive at like 2 a.m. on a night when I can't sleep and I'm scrolling on my phone, but otherwise I'm gonna forget. Okay, next up on our list, we have the one plant out of the 4 that we're discussing in the beginning of the video here that I would say plant with caution. So I only have one borage plant here so I can stay on top of it and make sure that it is not reseeding itself all over my garden. If you've ever grown comfrey, it's a very similar concept. So the only kind of comfrey I grow is a sterile comfrey for that reason. My mom started with a non-sterile comfrey and it pretty much like seeded itself everywhere in her garden. Kind of a pain. But borage is worth a little bit of drama and the little bit of extra steps you have to go through to make sure you are caring for this plant the way you need to care for this plant. So when I first started my borage seed in here, I started it directly in this bed. It was very slow going. I labeled it so I knew exactly where I planted it. I planted a couple seeds. It sprouted. It took forever to get going. But then once it really got going, I feel like I blinked my eyes and it exploded. It is mid-June in Maryland Zone 7A, and I have already cut back this plant a couple times and used it as a source of compost fodder. So you can cut pack these leaves and throw them in the compost. They're a really great source of green material for your compost because they grow so prolifically and so quickly, also like comfrey. Big difference between comfrey and borage though. You don't want to eat comfrey, but borage is edible. The young, smaller leaves are edible raw, but as with everything, look up the plant first to make sure that you personally are able to eat it. As the leaves get a little bit bigger, they get a little bit spiny and a little bit prickly, so you might not want to eat those without cooking them first. In fact, every source I've seen about eating borage recommends cooking the leaves before eating them first, unless they are the very, very small immature leaves before they really develop those spines. And the cute little flowers are edible too. I dropped the one I just had. Here it is. So you can pull off these flowers and use them in like drinks as garnishes because they're just pretty little periwinkle star-shaped flowers that have kind of like a cucumber taste to them. And because of the way these flowers are shaped, they are absolute bee magnets. So really, really great to attract pollinators to your raised beds where you want them to be doing lots of work. It's great to plant them around things like cucumbers. They make a really good companion for cucumbers. I have mine in my tomato bed here just because I wanted it somewhere very prominent where I could monitor it. So I have it planted with nasturtium and chamomile right next to it under all of my pole tomatoes. Okay, now moving on from our top 4 edible flowers, I want to talk a little bit about some of the flowers that I love in my garden that are flowers from plants that I don't actually plant for the flowers, if that makes sense. A lot of times when people grow herbs, they will snip them off as soon as they start to see them flowering, because that means that the plant is going to be putting all of its energy into those flowers and producing seeds to complete its life cycle. And if you want more herbs, you don't necessarily want that to happen. But there are 2 herbs that I always plant in my raised beds and around my garden and that I always let flower. And the first one of those is cilantro. Now I find that cilantro bolts really easily where we are. Cilantro actually likes cooler temperatures more, so we get cilantro pretty early, and then probably a couple weeks ago I noticed some of my cilantro plants starting to bolt. So if I want cilantro through the season, I will have to reseed it elsewhere in my garden that's a little bit shadier, and maybe we'll keep the temperature down a little bit more if I want to keep harvesting it. But those beautiful, delicate white little flowers are amazing for pollinators. They absolutely love them. So I am able to get basically 2 things out of my cilantro when I plant it. The first is that I'm obviously able to harvest cilantro, and then the second, when I let it go to seed, I get something that pollinators and all of those buzzy bugs are going to love. And then when I let those flowers finish and turn into seeds, I can save the seeds for next year's plant. So this is right next to my pole tomato bed. I've got a couple Roma tomatoes in this bed, and on the corner here, I've got a beautifully flowering cilantro plant. So not even a paid actor. We've got this ladybug here, probably munching up some aphids on this plant. Yep, we've got some signs of aphids down here. And what did I say about aphids on your plants? They are going to attract things that like to eat aphids, which we love. You're never going to get rid of aphids in your garden, so you might as well try to invite the things in that want to eat them. So these delicate little white flowers will eventually turn into circular pods that will turn into seeds. So this umbel right here is a good example of an umbel that's flowers have already dropped, and you start to see those round seed pods forming. When those get dry and brown, you can pop them off and save them for next year. And the second herb that I like to let flower every year is dill. And I'm gonna show you what my dill looks like from letting it flower last year and just drop seeds and reseed itself. So I have already harvested from this dill that reseeded itself and is growing in my onion beds probably 3 times, and I've frozen bags of it. And again, it's only mid-June. So I am trying to prevent this dill from going to seed because it's underneath this cover anyway, so not really a benefit for pollinators. But this is what your dill is gonna look like when it starts to get taller. It's gonna get these really thick stakes here, and then eventually, you will notice these really cool looking umbels of yellow flowers. Now this umbel of flowers here either is dying off or is just about to open. I can't really tell, but you will definitely see bugs flying around these. They love it. And once I start seeing signs of my dill starting to flower, I know it's going to seed, and then I am going to have to stop harvesting dill because it's not going to be producing a ton of it. So what I'll do is take off of this and then probably just sprinkle some dill seeds below it to start germinating a new round of dill. Here is another great example of a very tall dill that I need to add a support to that is starting to flower here. Now you don't need to pull these plants as soon as you start to see them flowering. You can let them go for a while because what they're gonna do is flower from a couple different points, and then it will give you loads of delicious dill seeds to save to plant for next year, especially if you have it somewhere like this in a container where when it reseeds itself, it's either just going to fall to the ground or maybe blow into beds next to it. If you want to save those seeds to plant them specific places, it's super easy to do. I'll throw up some pictures of the dill seed saving process. It's very rewarding, and the dill seeds before they're completely dry smell like dill too. And if you love the smell of dill, you'll love that news because I absolutely love the smell of dill. Dill is also a host plant for the black swallowtail butterfly. So along with other plants in the family like parsley and fennel, celery, carrots, stuff like that, they are going to attract those black swallowtail butterflies to lay their eggs, and then you'll see caterpillars on your dill a lot of the time. So I try and grow enough to share. This year I actually added a bronze fennel to my yard because I find that they stay growing for much longer than dill, so I can keep a reliable source of food for the black swallowtail caterpillars, because I generally find that they do not come in like 2 large waves like the monarch caterpillars do, one early and one late. They just kind of trickle throughout the summer. So I'll show you my bronze fennel now just as a little bonus to the dill. Here's my bronze fennel. I love how big and billowy it gets. Unlike the dill, it gets pretty tall, but it doesn't start to look like leggy and hollow stemmed. And would you look at that, like clockwork, I've got this gorgeous little chonker black swallowtail caterpillar down here. And I had a bunch of these on here the other day, maybe like a week or 2 ago now, and I see tons of signs of them eating on here. So they've either gone and either become bird food or formed their cocoons elsewhere to turn into those beautiful butterflies that we know and love. And if you like the smell of black licorice, or any licorice really, you'll love the smell of bronze fennel. I don't love the smell of licorice. Honestly, I don't really mind the smell of fennel as long as I'm not touching it. You can't really smell it like when you walk by, like sometimes you would a flower, but it has a very strong licorice scent to it. I can smell it on my hands right now after touching it. And as long as we're getting a little off track and talking herbs here, the one herb that I do not let flower until the very end of the season when I want to save seeds is my basil. This will stop basil production completely, and basil is not as easy to quickly reseed and grow new plants from. So what I like to do is just come and pinch off those tops to force it to branch. I usually don't overthink this. I just pinch it off, and then what it'll do is, since I've broken off that growth tip, it will turn into a bushier plant. So I just come through like roughly once a week or so and check for areas where it is trying to flower and pinch them off. If you pinch off a little bit lower, you can take something like this, throw it in water, it'll root all down the stem, and then you can plant it elsewhere to get a little bit of a jump start on starting some new basil. All right, for our last 2 honorable mention flowers here, we gotta go with 2 staples, 2 super easy to grow and easy to find things. The first one is marigolds. There are a lot of myths out there about planting marigolds. I have seen people go so far as to say plant marigolds and you won't get pests. And while marigolds do a really good job at preventing root rot nematodes, that's pretty much what they do. They're not going to deter a lot of pests. They do have a strong scent, but that is only one small portion of why we plant marigolds. I like to plant marigolds, honestly, because they're pretty and they give me color all season long. This one plant here was very cheap to buy, and it will eventually grow all around here, shading out the soil around all of our peppers. So my strategy with marigolds is I will generally buy a market pack of marigolds, and then I will look to see where I have bare space, and I will plop them down wherever I can strategically add them to help spread and shade out that soil. So I've got them all around. I've got them planted over here under a new blueberry shrub we planted this year. I've got them planted over here around a strawberry area that's still filling in. I've got them all around our ponds up here just to add some color, especially while some of the newer perennials that we've added this year are still filling out and coming into their own. And then the second super easy, super common one I like to grow is the humble zinnia, because who doesn't love that flower? It's just gorgeous. Pollinators love zinnias. I love zinnias for cut flowers. They provide some really interesting color and structure in the garden where you need to add some color and structure. I put a ton of zinnias in our front yard lawn conversion last year while we were waiting for some of the perennials to fill out, since we had just put everything in last year and it was still pretty bare. So I popped in lots of zinnias and sunflowers. I don't remember the last time I bought zinnia seeds. I save my own every year now, and I love to do a little row of zinnias up in the front yard along our path leading up to our front door. So yeah, there are plants that might be more beneficial for me to add, native plants, whatever, but sometimes I just grow things that I like, and I really like zinnias, so I grow them every year. They're super easy. They continuously bloom all summer. You can cut them for beautiful bouquets. There are just lots of great reasons to plant flowers, and I do not deny myself the little treat of just planting something just because I want to plant it. Okay, so to recap here, there are lots of reasons why you should be mixing up your plants in your garden and not just like planting flowers in one place and planting vegetables in another place and giving things a neat little box. You want to be creating a thriving ecosystem in your garden, and that means planting different things that attract different things, sometimes good, sometimes bad. And some of these flowers are super useful, right? Like you might want to make teas out of them, you might want to add them to bouquets. It's not just that they are attracting the beneficial insects that you need to pollinate your garden. So if you want to create a thriving ecosystem in your garden that helps sustain itself without a lot of inputs from you, interplanting flowers into your beds is the way to go. Focus a lot on annual flowers and herbs in this video, specifically and on purpose, because I want to talk about some of the native and perennial plants that I plant for the same reason around my raised beds in another video. So stay tuned for that. If you guys have any questions or any plants that you want to hear about, please let me know in the comments. And until my next video, happy planting.